The Atlanta Falcons will be a similar matchup for the Chicago Bears as they faced last week against the Detroit Lions, so the game plan to try and win on Sunday will likely look fairly similar.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. If Twitter is still existing and functioning by the time you listen to this podcast, you can follow Locked On Bears on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook as well. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And if you're watching along on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button on that Locked On Bears YouTube channel to make sure you're keeping up with all of our video podcasts. On the show today, we are going to put together a game plan for how the Chicago Bears can beat the Atlanta Falcons, end this losing streak, and get things rolling again on the win column. Today's episode of Locked On Bears is sponsored by SimpliSafe Home Security with Fast Protect technology exclusively from SimpliSafe. 24/7 monitoring agents capture evidence to accurately verify a threat for faster police response. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. Visit simplisafe.com/lockedonnfl to learn more. On the show today, we're going to put together that game plan with what the Bears need to do offensively to keep the scoring rolling this week against Atlanta. We'll look at what the Bears defense can do to try and get back on track and slow down another offense that is expecting to be able to move the ball against this Chicago defense, I think in some similar ways to what Detroit was doing last week. And we'll wrap up looking at some of the big matchups and also going through some of the former Chicago Bears. The long list of former Chicago Bears on the Atlanta Falcons will be quite a reunion for a lot of those players on this team. But let's start with what Justin Fields and the offense should be able to do this week. You know, certainly the Lions were a worse defense. I think they're right there at the bottom of the league along with the Chicago Bears right now. But the Falcons defense is not great on its own. And I'm expecting Justin Fields to be able to do a lot of the same types of Justin Fields things we've been seeing. I think most notably for me, what stands out is that the Atlanta Falcons do not have a strong pass rush at all. It's closer to the Bears and on the spectrum of inability to consistently pressure opposing quarterbacks. And so in theory then, Justin Fields should have some consistent time in the pocket. Not that it's going to be clean all game. The Bears offensive line will still make mistakes. We'll see how much the Falcons may want to try and blitz him. It's not something they do a ton of, but it's, again, game by game situational kind of thing that some games they could opt to bring a little bit more to try and get that pass rush. But I'm expecting Fields to have some time to throw. And if we see, as expected, a little bit more Chase Claypool as his role continues to increase, there's some talk that Eberflus Jones might be back in the offense this week as well with David Montgomery out of the mix. I think there's some real opportunity here for the Bears to be able to do some damage in the passing game, in addition to what will certainly be another strong game from Justin Fields running the ball. Taysom Hill ran all over this Falcons defense way back in week 1, but this is not a defense that I think is super well equipped to handle the mobile quarterback situation, especially on the back end. This is a defense that has a lot of missed tackles. Linebackers and safeties in particular have all missed like 7, 8, 9 tackles on the season, essentially like one per game per player across the board at a lot of those different positions. And so that's going to be some extra yards tacked onto the end of some of these plays. I think I misspoke there earlier and said David Montgomery out. It's Khalil Herbert that's out. It's David Montgomery who's in. I think I said the wrong running back there, but you got what I meant. That just sort of hit me mid-sentence. But I was thinking about missed tackles and those running backs forcing missed tackles. David Montgomery should be able to bounce off of a few more tackles and maybe extend some of those runs that have only been going 3 or 4 yards and make them more like 5 or 6 yards, because I don't think the tackling is particularly consistent from Atlanta. And we've seen opposing offenses really attack that linebacking core in particular in coverage. And I would expect the Bears to try and do something similar from a game plan standpoint. They're not going to be a heavy man-to-man team by any means. They're running on about a quarter of their coverages, is like 25% man coverage-ish, and the rest are going to be zone. And I imagine they're going to be a little more zone-heavy, trying to keep eyes on Justin Fields. But from an offensive matchup standpoint then, If you know that they're going to be sitting in zone, then you know where the linebackers are going to be and where you can attack them in coverage. They're never going to choose to put their linebacker on your wide receiver one-on-one in man coverage, right? In man, they can kind of dictate the matchups a little bit more. But in zone, it's all about where you put your receivers against where their players are just more stationary in their zone coverages. So, thinking about wide receivers working across the middle of the field, those crossing routes, those dig routes, and up the seams there to try and get those mismatches against the Falcons linebackers that I think, they're not the worst linebackers in the NFL by any means. Rashaan Evans has some talent, and Michael Walker was a fairly decent draft pick for them a couple of years ago. They also have one Nick Kwiatkowski on the bench, who I don't think he'll play much defensively, but just a fun former friend in that mix there. But I think, the likes of Mooney and Claypool and maybe Velus Jones, and a lot of teams have had good success, getting the running backs involved in the passing game because you have some missed tackles after the catch. Even on those little checkdowns that can be a 4-yard checkdown becomes an 8-yard gain because you make the first guy miss. So look for maybe a Treston Ebner to get some passing game work as he rotates into this group. Especially when you look at what the Bears are working with, on the injury report. Tevin Jenkins is likely looking like he's going to be out after missing practice. Cole Kmet's been a little bit limited, so we're not sure, is he going to be 100% working the seam? It feels to me more like getting those receivers in there against those or running backs against those linebackers is where there's going to be some possibility there. I'd also look at we talked yesterday with Aaron Freeman about A.J. Terrell, their cornerback. He's also on the injury report here, limited at practice, and seems to be trending towards playing, but is he going to be 100%? It's more of a soft tissue kind of thing he's dealing with. So will he play at less than 100% and maybe be a little more vulnerable? Do you test that injury out there as well? That's another thing to kind of keep an eye on there. But I think you certainly can take advantage of these Falcons linebackers. It doesn't even necessarily have to be where it's a lot of like play action sucking those linebackers in, but it's just the kind of plays where it's like if you have time to throw, the linebackers are going to be the ones that can hold the coverage the least amount of time, and your receivers can break away from most easily. And I think this matchup in particular with their linebackers have been what you've seen other offenses have some real success doing against them. Not too worried about the Bears putting up another 29-plus points in a game like this. It's going to come down to, can the defense make some more stops than we've seen over the last 3 or 4 weeks here? We'll look at some of the things that the Falcons may try and do offensively, what the Bears need to be ready for, and how to try and counteract some of that next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our friends at Tommy John. It is the makers of the most comfortable underwear out there, and it's important to have comfortable undergarments, right? It's protecting some very important parts, and you want to take good care of what you're working with down there under the hood. And Tommy John's is really giving it the luxury treatment, and it's the perfect thing for, it's not always a fun, exciting gift, but it's a practical gift that people want on the holidays. And you always need good socks and good underwear, especially at the holidays. And Tommy John's has their Black Friday sale going on right now, so you can give the gift of comfort to everyone on your list. Maybe even just yourself. Take care of yourself with brand new Tommy John underwear, loungewear, and pajamas. Their Black Friday sale, like I said, is going on right now, and you can get 30% off site-wide at TommyJohn.com/lockedon. You don't have to wait in a Black Friday line. You don't have to fight a crowd. You don't have to wake up early and click before they're out of stock or anything like that. It's 30% off everything right now at TommyJohn.com/lockedon. That's TommyJohn.com/lockedon. See site for details. The Bears defense hasn't been able to figure it out and make consistent enough stops over these last few games. And this Atlanta Falcons offense is going to provide some challenges as well. They're not, again, this is not a top flight offense by any means, but this Bears defense has struggled even against lesser offenses. And so, there's going to be some challenges here with guys like Drake London and Kyle Pitts in particular being big time difference makers. And of course, old friend Cordero Patterson. We've seen what kind of explosive player he can be as a running back now full time for them. And they move him around a little bit too, but so there's some real weapons here, even though you don't necessarily see Marcus Mariota as like dynamic, threatening quarterback that's going to beat you with his arm necessarily, but you do have to keep an eye on Marcus Mariota's legs. He's been able to scramble fairly effectively and add that as a small dynamic in their offense. He's not going for 100 yards like Justin Fields, but those extra 40 to 50 or 60 that he's going to get on the ground with his legs, it can pick up a really key first down in some of those really important situations for them. Just when you think you've got things covered on the back end, he can slip out and add a little bit more of that. In recent weeks, we've seen opposing defenses really try and blitz the heck out of Marcus Mariota. I think some of that is an effort to try and keep him in the pocket. Some of it's to try and force him to, make a brash decision with the ball or something too quick. And some of it's also to make up for lack of pass rush that some of the other defenses are having. We saw last week against the Lions. The Bears opted for more of a blitz-heavy game plan. And we saw the results, right? It didn't really fix. They got 2 sacks blitzing with Jack Sanborn, right? It at times got home, but in the bigger picture, right, it did not solve their defensive problems. And as I've seen, looking through what Marcus Mariota has been doing, it hasn't looked to me like the blitz itself has been particularly disruptive, right? It is a way to get some pressure sometimes, and it works in the sense that an effective blitz can get you a sack and get you pressure. But in terms of big picture, slowing down the Falcons offense, they found some ways to get rid of the ball quickly against blitz, have some built-in checks and hot routes and even protections and moving the pocket away from the blitz and things like that have limited how much in the big picture blitzing has slowed down their offense. Now, for the Bears, you haven't really been able to get a consistent pass rush in there. And, blitzing was supposed to be kind of the solution to that last week. And again, it got a couple sacks. So in some ways it worked, but it really left them limited on the back end in coverage. And we saw the Lions really have a lot of success with the play action and hitting the intermediate routes behind that. And that's what the Falcons offense does. They're a super heavy play action team, and they love to hit, whether it's Pitts kind of over the middle of the field or having London work those crossing routes and digs, any in that 15 to 20 yard range there behind the linebackers and in front of the safeties. The Falcons love that. They would love to open up and take more deeper shots, but they've been a little gun shy on the real bombs downfield. They'll take some of those shots have been, more to Kyle Pitts and working some of those matchups kind of up the middle of the field and deep. They don't really have a ton of super, super big speed at wide receiver. The speed they have is Damiere Byrd, former Chicago Bear, again, the running theme of this matchup. But London's a big bodied, possession number 1 receiver who they'll hit in that intermediate area. And of course, Pitts is some kind of freak made in a lab that's half tight end, half wide receiver who's really hard to cover with anybody. So he can definitely do some real damage there that you have to be on the you have to look out for. But the play action has been so difficult for this Bears defense to defend that they bite on it quite a bit, and they struggle to get back and really feel natural in the back end because the ball's usually going out as they're trying to get back into their spots, and don't have a good sense of where the receivers are yet at that point. And so it's going to be a challenge here. The flip side of that is, Marcus Mariota as a result tends to hold on to the ball a bit longer than other quarterbacks. He's not number 1 in the league in terms of holding on the ball the longest, but it's on the higher end of the spectrum. There's more time for your pass rush to get home. It's some of the things we've been seeing with Justin Fields, where especially when you have the play action, you're taking your eyes off of the defense to turn and fake the handoff. And so once you turn around, that's when you start the reading process, maybe a full second into the passing play. And so you're slowed down from being able to get rid of the ball as quickly there, which gives the pass rush more time and can give a blitz more time to get home. But if he's ready to quick turn and fire that hot read against the blitz, he can again kind of neutralize some of that stuff. So it's kind of this catch-22 of the play action is going to get you to suck in, and maybe the play action he can hold on to the ball too long and you can try and blitz and get there. But if you are blitzing or if you are really getting too aggressive on it and sucking in too much on the play action, they're going to get you. And it's really kind of boom or bust in how that ends up working for this Bears pass rush. Looks like Al-Quadin Muhammad will likely be out again for this game on that defensive line. So you'll be, you won't have the same strength at the defensive line. Although they added Taco Charlton, formerly of the Dallas Cowboys, where he worked with Matt Eberflus, former high draft pick out of Michigan, who maybe he can come in here and get something going there. I'm glad to see just a fresh body in the defensive line rotation because they just need to try somebody else there, because they're just not working with what they had. They waived Kingsley Jonathan and said, sorry, you got bulldozed out of the water a couple times by Penei Sewell against the Lions. Sorry, kid, not what we're looking for there. So they're going with a guy like Charlton. Let's see what he can do. Let's see if Taco can come to Chicago and have some success there. TBD on whether Kindle Vildor will play. He was limited at practice on Thursday. Missed last week, of course, and so that limited what they could do in coverage here. We'll kind of see what that looks like. If it's Jalen Jones again, do they try and match up a 6'5" Drake London on him and attack that as much as possible, or get the tight end Pitts over on him and see what they can do there, right? They can stress you in some ways. And I think the Falcons are going to be able to put some points up in this game. And that's why, again, it feels a lot like what we saw with the Lions last week, where it's not a great team, but your defense can't slow them down, and their defense can't slow you down. And who's going to score last and ultimately pull ahead with that victory? It's going to come down to how some of these one-on-one matchups go, and we'll go through some of the biggest names head-to-head, and then take a quick stroll through memory lane on all the former Bears on this Atlanta Falcons, not only roster, but also coaching staff and front office, next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our friends at BetOnline, the number one place we recommend for all of your sports betting needs. Right now, the betting line for Bears Falcons is Falcons -3, just a 3-point favorite at home. Typically, the home team gets 3 points on the spread, so they're seeing these two teams as pretty much even. If you want to pick the Bears upset straight up, the money line is plus 140, and the over-under is set at 49. It's moved slightly down from 50, where it was earlier in this week. So if you like those odds, BetOnline is going to be the place to do it. Not only for Bears games, but across sports, from football to basketball to soccer and esports. They've got it all at betonline.net. It's the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix, all the info, stats, news, and analysis you could possibly want. So head on over to their website today or use your mobile device to learn more about all the different trends and action happening right now. BetOnline, where the game starts. When you look at the biggest matchups in a game like this that I think go a long way towards deciding it, one of them we talked about a little bit yesterday with Aaron Freeman. For me, it's Grady Jarrett on the defensive tackle for the Atlanta Falcons on the interior of that defensive line against, Sam Mustipher at center and what looks very likely to be Michael Schofield at right guard, with Tevin Jenkins out, missing practice again this week. They don't have much of a pass rush in Atlanta, but where it does come from is Jarrett on the interior. Like, the edge guys, they're not consistently winning pass rushes and getting home. Like, you can't ignore them and pretend like it's going to be, no big deal. But like, I'm less worried about Braxton Jones and Riley Reif. I think they'll be okay in a matchup like this. Sure, they'll get one here or there, but it's not going to be a Aiden Hutchinson style where he just can take over a key play late in the game like the Lions saw it last week. But the interior there, Grady Jarrett, get 2 blockers on him at all times, because the other interior defensive linemen for the Falcons don't really scare you. Another former Bear name, as we sprinkle these in, Abdullah Anderson, the defensive tackle, a former undrafted free agent, has been rotating in with them a decent amount on that interior as well, but not a pass rushing threat that you're going to lose sleep over. But as long as Mustipher and Schofield can keep Jarrett in front of him, he's quick, he's athletic, he can do some real damage up front. He's explosive for a 6 foot 300-pound hog on the interior. I'm also worried about who the Falcons offense is going to match Kyle Pitts up with, because I'd love to see him and Brisker go one-on-one and see how they sort of, how their skill sets match up. But like, as much as I've been encouraged by Jack Sanborn, I'm not sure he can keep up with a dynamic freak athlete like Kyle Pitts at the tight end position. And I think Nick Morrow has the speed to run with him, but I think Pitts is a good enough route runner that he can create that separation with his skills and his hands, and not so much just like being able to keep up with him speed. Like, if you could combine Sanborn and Morrow, you might be able to do something there, more like a Roquan Smith type, but that's going to be tough. Or if it's Jalen Jones, like we talked about, like, can an undrafted rookie free agent cornerback match up with a former first-round pick who's just a dynamic player at the tight end position? Is he going to carve up and down the middle of this Bears defense, especially on those play-action plays in some of the same ways that we see Cole Kmet have success off of play-action in Chicago's offensive scheme? That could be tricky, and I'm curious to see how the Bears handle that and how the Falcons try and move him around to get him some of those one-on-one matchups, because you can't pay all your attention to Pitts and ignore a 6'5" wide receiver like Drake London, who's also kind of like a tight end. He's smaller in terms of the bulk. He's 6'4", but about 40 pounds lighter, but still that build of a physical number one outside possession kind of wide receiver. And so that's a lot to ask for. And certainly then you got to also keep in mind Mariota's running ability on top of that, and Cordell Patterson being dynamic with the ball in his hands. So there's some real threats here to keep an eye on that the Bears are going to need to come up with some different answers for and have some backup plans if your first solution doesn't work here. I'm also wondering what kind of influence all the former Bears in the building will be able to have. There's been a lot of turnover in Chicago. It's not anywhere close to the same roster, but some of the longtime Bears played with some of these guys, were coached by some of these Falcons coaches, and were drafted by 2 of these Falcons executives. So we'll start there. Of course, Ryan Pace and Phil Emery are both in the Falcons front office there. It's a big reason why you've seen so many Chicago Bears head over to Atlanta. But the list here of players and coaches is quite extensive, more than you would expect if you haven't been paying attention. It's why it's kind of a running joke between Bears and Falcons fans, because you got quarterbacks coach Dave Ragone from Chicago, who's I think their offensive coordinator now. Charles London was the Bears running backs coach 2 years ago under Nagy. He's now their quarterbacks coach in Atlanta. Michael Pitre was the Bears running backs coach last year, who replaced Charles London at that position. He's now the running backs coach with the Atlanta Falcons. Former Bears defensive backs coach, and was he defensive coordinator as well? John Hoke, back in like the Charles Tillman, Nathan Vasher days. Former Bears coach is coaching the secondary there. And then the linebackers coach, Ted Monachino, under, I could picture the former Colts guy. Why can't I think of the Bears defensive coordinator after Vic Fangio and before Sean Desai? Chuck Pagano. Jeez, I could picture his Italian slick back hair and face. Pagano's linebackers coach, Ted Monachino, is also the Falcons linebackers coach again there too. So like he's coached some of these guys. And of course the running backs coach, he'll know both of those running backs coaches will know David Montgomery quite well. They'll probably know Justin Fields a little bit in there too. And of course, Ryan Pace drafted all those guys and brought in all the remaining Bears players were Ryan Pace players. But then all the other Ryan Pace players on the Falcons coaching staff, some we mentioned, some we didn't. Demir Byrd at wide receiver. On the offensive line, Jermaine Ifedi is one of their backup tackles, and they have Elijah Wilkinson on injured reserve. Running back Damian Williams is also on injured reserve for them, but 2 former Bears still under contract. Michael Pruitt, the tight end, was in Bears training camp. He's on their roster. Talked about Cordero Patterson, Abdullah Anderson on the defensive line, Nick Kwiatkowski at linebacker as well. And there were a bunch more on their training camp roster that didn't make the 53 as well. It's really wild how many bad former Chicago Bears players are on the Falcons, right? Most of those are guys that you don't miss. You don't really miss Demir Byrd. You don't miss Jermaine Ifedi. You don't really miss Elijah Wilkinson. You miss Nick Kwiatkowski. I like Nick Kwiatkowski. You miss Cordero Patterson. I like Patterson, but like the rest of those guys, best of luck to you in Atlanta, but not shedding any tears there or, really wishing those players were still members of the Chicago Bears. We're on to the Ryan Poles era there, and we're seeing what this turnover is going to look like for the rest of the season and beyond. We're seeing how all these new additions are going to do against the Atlanta Falcons, and win, lose, or God forbid a tie, you can be sure we'll be here for you to break it all down right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button. However you're listening to the podcast right now, or if you're watching on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today, and hopefully every single day. If you're looking for your second listen, now that we're wrapping up, check out Locked On Sports Today. It's the biggest stories across sports with instant reactions, big game recaps, and all the important takes across sports to get you up to date on anything you might have missed in the wide world of sports the night before. You can't watch all the games, but we here on the Locked On Podcast Network can. And we are your team every day and your sports every day with the Locked On Sports Today podcast, wherever you're listening to podcasts or on YouTube as well. And make sure you come on back on Monday as we recap whatever happens against the Atlanta Falcons. And we keep this train a-rolling. Don't forget to come on back as well for that next opportunity for you to bear down.